Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most wordy and righteous work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we're coming at you live in the Discord.
Hey, thanks to everyone who's come along to listen to us live. So
Yeah.
we get into the 17th arc.
Well, let's do it. But first, one last chapter of Left in the Dust. 16.Z, we're with the bug snacks, I guess, is what we'll call them.
Basil's bug snacks.
Starting with the history of the Turtle Queen, a group of images that got a bit too big for its boots.
I love this little, this is what the interlude's always great at, right? Like this little horror story sort of vibe. Like this is just the origin story of a terrifying horror monster that could carry like a movie franchise.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I love the way this evolves, like, because it is just kind of like fun at the start.
Yeah.
With like, oh, it's like a mural that's also on some shirts that's kind of come to life or gaining, some level of sentience. And it's really delightful. And then it becomes very, very horrifying quite quickly.
Yeah. Oh, and it's interesting because the reason it becomes terrible is like people, because the guy slaps the student or whatever.
Yes.
And that's what fuels it. And really that fuel is coming from anger. So the Turtle Queen comes out angry and shitty because of people.
Yeah. I mean, I love that it's like tying into this idea of it's a moral righteousness kind of, like anger based on I can't believe this situation has happened. Like it's it's based around morality, which is very fun based on the way that this chapter goes and kind of the questions it asks.
Yeah, it is, for want of a better word, bridging the space between arcs 16 and 17.
Yeah, beautiful.
But no, because we saw an origin story pretty similar to the Turtle Queen's, which was Faceful in arc 13. Like the big face in the Carmine contest. He started off as like, oh, this face appeared in a video game and somewhere else. I can't remember the details, but like,
yeah,
I get the impression he was basically the same thing, but he was just like, our innocent, fun dude. Like,
yeah,
he just wanted to make friends.
Well,
so I think
because gamers are so chill.
No, it was an indie game. It's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I mean, it was. He seemed to come from a really nice place. Really, the only thing that separates him and the Turtle Queen was basically the reason they went viral and the stuff behind it. So like it's kind of society's fault at the end of the day.
Yep.
And I think that's why this works really well as like the follow on to 16.y, because Millie's interlude was all about how the system was causing good practitioners to fail and become corrupted. And then this chapter comes in as a follow-up to remind us that, hey, most others are inspired by or come from humanity. So when the system's making all the people fail, that that part trickles down, and then, all the others come out of the gates swinging like violently.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's a reflection of humanity.
Yeah, exactly. And Lap's Classicist has brought up a great point in the chat, which is like, this is essentially Lys's argument as well, that she came out fucking miserable because she was at like a girls' boarding school or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I guess that starts to tie into all this stuff about where personal responsibility fits in.
Yeah, which I think is the theme of next arc.
Yeah, we'll get to talk about this a lot more in arc 17.
So yeah, the Turtle Queen becomes more and more violent in an effort to expand her reach. Eventually, finally, practitioners take notice and Basil binds her.
Yeah, thank God we have people like Basil in the world taking care of this stuff. Am I right?
Yeah, thank God
for practitioners.
The Turtle Queen is like evil, right? Like, it actually, on my second read through, it actually was surprising to me how much they were talking about Bridge as the moral question when I was like, the Turtle Queen is so much worse than Bridge. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I put the Turtle Queen on par with the Milkmaid in terms of others that I'm not comfortable associating with this other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I have to agree because the way she just takes over people and spaces is just horrifying, and we see a bit of how she thinks about it here, and it's scary.
Mm,
I mean, it reminds me a lot of our conversations around John, and I think like the stuff we're going to be talking about a lot in this episode, and presumably Arc 17. A lot of it is tying back to the conversations we used to have about John half the story ago, where it was like he was shaped by the people he killed, and the Turtle Queen has been shaped by the people she absorbs and the energy she got. So it's like she was set up to fail, but also she's turned into just a terrifying, sociopathic monster.
yeah, yeah, and like the concept of she's clearly at her core very much a product of just like the society that built her. But even
Yeah.
so, God, horrifying,
Yeah. I mean,
horrifying.
like this is the thing, right? Like that in and of itself isn't really a full defense because I would happily argue that Massa and Charles are products of their environments too. Doesn't mean I don't want to take them down, you know? Like this is the Turtle Queen has kind of I think probably crossed that threshold for me as well of like
Yeah,
the excuses have sort of become irrelevant now. She just needs to be stopped because she's fucking scary.
yeah, yeah. So I guess she's freed, and Rook is negotiating with her. Yeah, it's well, we'll get
But
into it.
yeah, before we get into it, well, I'll bring up like what I think is a fun point, which is I love that the Turtle Queen is like, "Oh, I'm free," and not in that like temporary way. They've actually like properly freed me. And then she looks around the room and realizes that like Rook has her and Basil positioned in such a way that she's still trapped in the room.
Mm,
Um, uh, which like leans into Rook's whole positioning thing as well. But I just also think it speaks to like Rook's kind of hypocrisy about the way she goes about things because yeah, she's undone the binding and what she would consider the toxic, terrible kind of trapping. But then she's just gone on to trap the Turtle Queen to the same extent, and it all but threatens to rebind her until a time where she would be useful again.
mm,
So I just think it's interesting that like you can tell Rook thinks it's a big deal that she's undone like a practitioner's binding, but then she traps the Turtle Queen in essentially the same way and threatens to redo it if she doesn't agree to like hang out with them. Like it's yeah, we'll get into Rook a lot more later, but Rook just reeks of this sort of as bad as the enemies she's fighting vibe for me right here.
yeah, yeah. Which is not great, and obviously Avery will pull this out soon enough.
Yeah.
Another point in the Turtle Queen being evil column. As soon as she is freed, the first thing she does is like I don't know the word to use, but I'm going to say dominate the Countdown Cassandra and the Type Tap Kitty, which is again very like, oh, that's just kind of gross.
Yeah, especially when we're going to get to Avery discussing the morality of possessing people with bridge and shit.
Yes.
Using the Turtle Queen to take over and influence bugs, people, whatever. Just yeah, it's creepy. And
Yeah.
again, to dunk on Rook, I can see why Rook chose the Turtle Queen because I think there's a lot of similarities between those two.
Mm,
Um,
interesting.
Sorry, to answer Walbo's question in the chat, I don't know if Rook necessarily thought the Turtle Queen would take them over or not. Um, it doesn't matter to me. I still think
Yeah.
it's telling us that the Turtle Queen sucks. And I think to get back to dunking on Rook, um, both of them are obviously very angry people, but we've seen Rook has this pattern of taking others and the justifiable ones, the like problematic ones, but essentially binding them, taking them and then using them when appropriate as part of her game. And like, is that really
Mm,
that difference to what we just saw the Turtle Queen do with some of the others? Um,
yeah. At
I think the
least
other
with the
thing I
Turtle
wanted to call out
Queen.
the Turtle Queen later on. One of her biggest powers is that she can kind of also take over and subvert practitioners' practice.
Yes.
which feels like, again, a more condensed version of what Rook sort of does. So
Mm,
I think the Turtle Queen is an interesting first choice for Rook because she acts as this really interesting foil for Rook, and that I think in some ways she's an almost worse example of who Rook is.
mm, yeah. Yeah. It's just such an interesting because I think if the Countdown Cassandra and the Type Tap Kitty, it's very easy to be just fully on their like in their camp. You know what I mean? Like they're very fun
Yeah, yeah.
and they don't feel like evil, you know? I mean, Countdown Cassandra is clearly strong and clearly causes some damage and clearly has caused damage to people in the past, but like has the balance of like, oh, you know, at least she tells one. I don't know. I mean, like, I guess it's the fact that she doesn't feel as openly malicious. Um,
Yeah.
and also any maliciousness that I read from the Countdown Cassandra in this part of the chapter, in my head, I think I've just slotted into, well, it's because she's being influenced by the Turtle Queen. So the normal Countdown Cassandra, I'm sure is super chill.
Yeah, she just, it catches people in these bad fates and only lets one person survive.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I mean, Countdown Cassandra is definitely still pretty bad, but
yeah,
like,
she feels
uh,
more at the whim of the role that she's in. Like she's this servant of
yes,
fate. I think that's the framing that makes it feel different to me. Is Countdown Cassandra feels like somebody who is having to act out this pattern or she die, whereas the Turtle Queen seems to relish in growing and causing violence.
mm,
Also, yeah, as Fran points out in chat, the Countdown Cassandra looks really cool,
mm.
and that's important.
Yeah, and you know what else? It feels like you're right. It feels like the Countdown Cassandra kind of is more tapped into the universe in a way, or like is a more fair opponent. You know, or like
Yeah.
more. I don't even know, like just. This is just kind of off the top of my head, but like that's definitely the feeling that you get from it. Just because it's more like there are more rules around what the Countdown Cassandra is doing. It's not like a just kind of going out there and having
Well, yeah,
people
you know what it
slapped to
is.
death.
The Countdown Cassandra doesn't really reflect on morality at all. She's almost like
Mm,
freakishly amoral, and how it's just like this is the fate and the disaster that like this is the pattern that will unfold. It's very
yes.
divorced from responsibility for actions. Whereas the Turtle
Yeah.
Queen is very much like, oh, I'm going to take over this shit and cause violence.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Sengachi puts it well by saying that the Countdown Cassandra feels kind of like Alpi. And I think that's right.
yeah,
It's like, but anyway, so then the kind of through line of this chapter is, to me, starting with the most detestable, I guess, and
yeah.
like malevolent, and then getting to the least over the course of the chapter, and then jumping back to Bridge and Avery at the end. And I just think that's an interesting kind of flow.
Yeah, I think because we're naturally sympathetic to others, this chapter really opens with the one who I would say is the most just morally off-putting in order
Mm,
to cause us to enter this mind space of questioning what tools we shouldn't use because that's ultimately where we end up with Avery. Um,
mm,
I suppose before we leave like the whole Turtle Queen conversation behind us, I do just also want to call out Rook says she has plans to incorporate the Turtle Queen into Found Kennet. Um,
yeah.
so I imagine we'll get to have a lot more of this talk later on because this like that's gonna have to be a thing, I reckon. Like the Turtle Queen, the way she takes over and subsumes stuff, her natural inclination towards violence, like there's no way that she can just be a big part of it without some extreme caveats and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And Rook obviously kind of talks about, I don't know, hampering the Turtle Queen and changing what the Turtle Queen is, both kind of through the Turtle Queen's active decisions and through, you know, Rook's shenanigans. But even so, I don't know. So yeah, we switch to the perspective of the Countdown Cassandra, who starts to move through the house and set up her disasters.
Yeah, what's even funny is before this conversation, I had written down my notes here. It's funny how the Countdown Cassandra is more likable than the Turtle Queen, despite being an entity of disaster and fate.
Yeah, I
So,
know. It's so strange. But no, it's totally true. Um, Speaking of being likable, I really liked Millie and America and how like quick on the uptake they were. Like it's so fun in a story that's about, about youth and younger practitioners, and kind of comparing them to the older practitioners in this scene. And like Millie and America feel like they're actually like immediately on on the uptake of what's going on, whereas the older practitioners, I was like, how are they so bad at this? Like a strange other that they don't recognize just shows up and they're like, oh, shouldn't we deal with you?
Yeah.
Like
What?
I don't know. I mean, obviously the others are kind of making their move, and that's Cassandra's impacting connections and stuff, and like obviously it's kind of like justifiable that the older practitioners are like not as quick on the uptake because of that. But still, it's so funny to me that like it's just a great marker of how the younger practitioners who are less kind of, I don't know, fully like set in the practitioner society or whatever,
Yeah.
just are a bit more willing to kind of question things,
Yeah. Well, because
It- it-
the older practitioners just see Countdown Cassandra and they're like, "Can somebody take care of this son?" Like it's the reaction you get if you're at a big dinner party and you see like a dog running around, and it's
yes.
like, "Oh, can somebody like take care of this dog that's biting people's ankles?" Like
Yeah.
it's a super dismissive and condescending sort of framing of how they treat it, whereas all the kids tend to be like, "Hold on, like, what's your deal?" Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I like what Mirthstrike said, framing this as, again, generationally, that to the older practitioners, others are like the help and just kind of like not a thing to, I don't know, they've been sorted into their box already, so they
yeah.
don't need to be worried about.
I mean, it's a question of how long that becomes till that becomes true for the younger practitioners as well.
Yeah.
The other sort of response I had down here for that is also we do have to keep in mind that these are all the like the D list older practitioners, like all the important people are like on the other side of the state or
Mm,
province, I think they call them in Canada.
mm.
Um, so it's like like people like America and Millie are only D list in part because of their age.
Yes. Yeah, which is fair still. Therefore, the fact that these are, well, America's not that young, but Millie is quite young, right? Like
I think they're
the
about the same
fact.
age.
Oh, really? For some reason, I
Yeah.
have America as older in my head, but yeah, you're
I
right.
think they're both like 17ish, 17,
17,
18.
18. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but they're still quite young
Yeah.
comparatively. So
Well, yeah.
the fact that they're doing better, even in this playing field where it's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of ridiculous that they're doing better than these much older practitioners.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I also like that Bridge kind of calls out, as Millie is pulling her shit, Bridge calls out, "You let another free, one that many wanted bound," and this falters Millie's practice or maybe her strength. I don't. It was kind of ambiguous to me whether this was kind of Millie hesitating or her practice hesitating as a result of what she had done. But either way, it's wonderful, and it has. And Millie totally fucked up, and this chapter just like completely confirms that.
¿Por qué no los dos?
Did that come through?
Exactly. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that came
Yeah.
through. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because like like the moment that you're talking about, it's this great moment where Millie almost seems like she's going to beat all of them, all of these others back because she starts to remember she's
Yes.
like, I'm a knight, I did all these totally cool missions for like higher powers, like I have a important job and I'm calling on this power now to defend myself. And she starts to get powered up, and you're like, oh shit, and then yeah, Bridge just calls on, no, you just recently let one of them out, you dick shit.
Yeah.
And it completely undermines it. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's what
That's
I would
totally
define
fair.
karma as. Yeah.
It happened.
Um, yeah, I loved it. Like it's such a great moment to see her draw on the honor of her job and have someone like Bridge undermine that because she just did.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And this chapter confirms completely that she was being manipulated, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We'll get to that a little bit later. So yeah, the practitioners eventually do notice what's going on, but it's too late. Countdown Cassandra's countdown reaches 0, lightning strikes, and the attack begins.
Yeah, and this is just like really cool. Like the seeing a trap like this get sprung.
Yeah.
Like it's just fun in any context watching yeah, the lightning strike, the lights go out, like you can see it visually as just like there's like flashes as we see people getting wrecked by bugs and stuff. It's just a cool moment.
Yeah, it's very cool. And ends with this section ends with the line, and with that done, the Turtle Queen no longer held back. She took the house, which again is just like, oh yeah, God,
She's terrifying.
Doesn't feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, again, one of the other things that we haven't actually touched on with her, we saw in her origin story, she usually had multiple people she'd use as like part-time hosts, and she owns them even when they're not her hosts. Like,
Yeah.
is that part of the plan here? Like, just again, we're gonna get to Avery questioning using stuff like Bridge, and I can't help but extend that 100 times more to everything to do with the Turtle Queen.
Yeah, it was a little. It felt to me I was a little uncertain as to whether the Turtle Queen is actually like. Is she similar to how she had the cult of people in turtle jerseys who slapped that girl to nearly death? It like that's what's happening here, right? That she's going to kind of start. I don't know, mind influencing them, which feels like it's like Bridge on a much worse level.
Yeah, there's definitely signs that she doesn't get to do that to these practitioners
Yes.
in this house because of, well, basically the Bjorgman's influence. But I feel like she would if she could, and this would tie into any potential role she's going to have in Found Kennet. Really, like what space is there for her there.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to talk this to death in a later episode.
Yeah, I think we'll see more Turtle Queen soon enough. So when Lucy meets the Turtle Queen, I'm sure there will be some choice words. So we switch perspectives again, following the Type Tap Kitty as they head out through a phone call to Mussa.
And they are a technomancy fancy. Just wanted to say that again.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that Mussa is seeming to not be doing well as a leader. Like, there's a bit of a rebellion brewing, which is fun.
Sorry, I just Walbo's just commented in the chat on the pronunciation of bug spelt with 2 G's and an E. I'd been pronouncing it like more like Bug in my head, but bugger.
Bugger or bugger.
I can't do bugger because that's too close to
Bugger.
like bugger, like which it just too commonly in my vocabulary is an Australian. Yeah, bugger.
Bugger. Yeah.
Anyway, I think we're almost through this section with them, so then it won't matter anymore, right? But yeah, no, it's like it's worth calling out, and I've seen a lot of people discuss this on like Reddits and Discords. The fact that Mussa even took Toronto is like a huge leap from where he said he was going in 14.z. And so, as I think it's Grayson Hennigan points out here, like either Mussa is changing the plan as he's going, or he's keeping it from everyone else, and both of them suck. Is basically his point. And it's like, yeah, like this is the thing. Mussa just doesn't care about anyone else enough to be a good leader, as he said.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's that he's just changing the plan and kind of mixing it up as he goes. But that really does demonstrate a kind of lack of his ability to actually realize how the plan is going to play out. Like,
yeah,
even with all the augurs that he hired, he still didn't really know what was going to happen.
What's even worse is he has that moment where he's like, I think Grayson's like, look, I think a lot of them would just like someone who, they could send a representative and you can talk to them, and then that person could tell everyone else what's going on. And Mussa's basically like, that sounds like bureaucracy and I don't want to have to deal with it. So we'll just like send somebody to take care of it as if it's an invasion. And if it's not, well, we'll already have somebody who specializes in violence over there. Like, it's just the whole thing. He just doesn't care about anyone else. And the idea of having other people who he has to explain and justify himself to, he just shuts it down. Like, just dictatoring, basically.
Yeah, he's going to fail just from his inability to manage people, right?
Well, Rook and Bridge seem to be planning to help him with that.
Yeah, well, let's get to that, shall we? So we switch back to Bridge, and Avery is basically criticizing what they've been doing. Yeah, can we? I want to talk about this part where, yeah, Rook and Bridge are like, I guess we'll have to help Musa, and it's just kind of like, this is so fucked.
I how does Kennet keep ending up in this spot? When they're
Yeah.
like, because Rook's basically, and I actually fully understand Rook's logic of if Massa has a tenuous grasp on his own like hierarchy, he will have more to prove. He'll be more violent. So we want him super confident and arrogant, which is like, okay, so you want him to have all the power. I mean, I guess that's
Mm.
in a way better. Like I can understand your flow of logic, but this turns into her and Bridge being like, yeah, so we're gonna have to help prop Massa up a bit. And like I just remember in like Arc 13 feeling the same when they're like talking about like Massa versus the witch hunters and stuff. Like Kennet has got to stop picking enemies where their role is to help them so that they can get more powerful so that they can take out the other enemies. Like it's just this is playing with fire. I understand the logic behind doing it, but like, oh god,
Yeah, I
what a
mean,
wild spot to be in.
it's worth pointing out that the fact that they, were kind of helping Musa is directly led to Charles taking the throne, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so kind of troubling.
I mean, yeah, it's just an interesting spot they keep finding themselves in. And this touches on I mean, okay, like full disclosure for everyone listening right now, we recorded the reflecting episode for this arc yesterday.
Mhm.
And so we talked a lot about this topic. So I'm trying not to repeat myself too much because when
Mm.
you listen to the reflecting episode in a few days, you will get to hear us go on about this particular aspect of things a bit. But just like Rook needing to, I think, reevaluate how she keeps ending up in this position where she's propping up enemies to be able to take them down later, despite the fact she always loses. Like what? Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, I guess if Rook has never had a war go really successfully, maybe it's time for her to change the way she does things.
Yeah, and this is what I talked about a lot yesterday. Just the idea that Rook needs to suck it up and take a back seat and stop making plans without consulting everyone else because her plans suck. I mean, they're good, but also they suck.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're
Um,
good up until the point where they don't work, right? So, um,
yeah, but
yeah,
again, I just really love this position, like Avery sitting opposite Rook too, because while I think Rook is too far one way, I actually think it would be fair to say that Ave is too far the other way.
mm,
Ave is a little bit too naive and innocent for a war,
mm,
and I just really enjoy seeing these two go at it because I don't quite agree with either of them. I think Avery isn't hard enough to make the rough calls when you do need to, and I think Rook is too okay making the hard calls when you don't need to.
yeah. I guess I would say like I feel like there's a lot more people on the side of more willing to make the hard calls than there are on Avery's side. I feel like Avery and Lucy maybe are the only two people pushing back against that.
Yeah,
Um,
and I would call into question any team that didn't have an Avery. I think you
yes, exactly.
need somebody who's saying, "Hey, look, we did that, but it was shit, and we only did it because we had to, and we should feel bad."
Yeah,
Like the point where you become like Rook and you're just sort of okay with, well, we're going to use Bridge because we need to, without it
yeah,
being even a question. Like that's where the concern comes in for me.
yeah, yeah. Like Rook in her head only has two options, and it's either, well, we can either murder everybody or we can do another thing. And if it's not as bad as murdering everybody, then it's great.
Yeah,
So you can't complain. And it's kind of like, no,
yeah,
that's not how it works.
yeah. I could have done it worse. Is a shit argument, Rook.
Yeah. I do like the confirmation that the Bjorkman still just fully had a grasp on all three of those kids that were
Yep.
released, and Millie is just 100% a piece of shit that was conned. Clearly, I mean, we all knew it, obviously. Yeah. Anywho, that's the end of Arc 16. Let's get into 17. Gone and Done It with Lucy.
Now
And
they
this
gone and
chapter,
done it. Like,
how they gone and done it.
what an arc
Uh,
title.
So yeah, Lucy, Verona, and Avery are watching as a meteor heads straight for Kennet, and Alpi is commenting on how little she has needed to change for this nightmare.
Yeah, they're all in sync. It's nice. I really enjoy seeing an Alpy nightmare that's just like mostly a fun, like synchronized view of the town from our three Kenneteers. Usually,
Yeah.
it's much more like we get a peek at each of their own nightmares. Whereas I really enjoy the different vibes you get from this one, where they're all on the same page.
Yeah, but that page is worrying because they all seem to be very anxious about a disaster about to strike, and it's the meteor's faceless, which to me implies they don't fully know exactly what the disaster is going to be, just that it's coming for Kennet and everybody within it soon enough.
Oh, I just assumed that's because it was Miss.
Oh, really? Interesting. But then Miss comes out afterwards, right?
Yeah, when the meteor lands.
Ah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Like, because I just thought that was a particularly funny way to describe a meteor, because I was like, well, meteors don't typically have
Yeah,
faces.
exactly.
um, yeah, because they've described Miss as a meteor in this plan at some point a while ago. So I assume that was what this was leaning into.
I don't know. Do you think that, like, I don't see Miss. I see Miss as going to have an impact, and I don't necessarily know. Well, I guess meteors have impacts too, but I don't necessarily know, like, if she's going to be a positive or negative force. You know what I mean?
Well, that's very much what we're calling into question in this chapter, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's a moment where, like, the sort of the bloodiness on Mrs. Hand leaks out from her model in this dream, which I think is very much tying into that doubt. There is even the Kenneteers are a bit like they have their doubts, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. I would like to see Kaiju Miss in real life. I think that'd be very fun.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what physical changes happen to Miss if she becomes the less equivalent of found Kennet. Like what physical changes would accompany something like that?
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, becoming giant, I guess, is the answer.
I mean, it could be worse. But I love how Alpi just almost right at the start of this chapter quickly addresses the topic of not what I assume is not just this chapter, but what will be the entire arc. In fact, it's just been one of the major themes of the story since arc 12, which is when Alpi says to them, "You're all feeling that identical." Well, I'm going to do an accent for this one. You're all
More
feeling that
Shrek, more
identical
Shrek.
way about this. So how come you're standing so far apart? Which is just like that's been the problem with Kennet for so long now, right? Is they're all kind of on the same page, but also in very different places.
Yeah.
And Alpi's just starting to call that out overtly, and it leads the Kenneteers to start talking about this themselves. And there's this great moment where Avery says, "Are we fine? Is Kennet?" And Lucy goes on to answer about how fine Kennet is. Completely disregards the first half of the question.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, this is like there's sort of really two big things that get juggled in this conversation and quickly become established as stuff for this arc. There's obviously all the moral stuff that we're going to get into a lot, but something else that comes up here is like the Kenneteers have obviously been, separated for quite a few arcs now, both like physically and also kind of friendship wise.
Yeah.
And we are starting to see what it's going to look like as they come back together. And I'm just so interested to see what shape that takes, because there's a lot of really great moments in this conversation where it feels like you're just reading three friends chatting again. Like there's that great moment where Verona describes the milkmaid as like a 5 out of 10, and then Lucy and Avery start giving her shit, and then she has to go like, "Look, the point is," and it just felt like a great friend moment. But then there's still a lot of that, awkwardness, acknowledgement they're not on the same page, like things are still a little bit bumpy. And I can't wait to see how we try to put them together again while admitting that they're not going to be exactly the same.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's they're just, I don't know, the dynamic of this group. It feels like it's still in flux, and we don't know what it's going to look like when it's finished, I
Yeah.
suppose.
And because I remember early in the story, like, it started to feel like they were getting borderline telepathic, like they were always so on the same page. And now that we've moved into like the more complicated part of the story, that almost feels antithetical to what Pale is really about, which is this idea of being able to work together despite not being the same. And I love that that's become a really central thing for the Kenneteers themselves. Like, they're all acknowledging that they want to work together, but they're on different pages, and they're trying to figure out how the fuck they can reconcile those two facts, not just for themselves, but for like Kennet and the practitioner community as a wider whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can't wait for Wildbow to give us the answer.
I'm sure we'll get some answers soon enough.
Also, last thing I really wanted to call out from just the opening of this dream, we get told where each Kenneteer is standing in town, and obviously Verona's at the house on Half Street, makes sense. Avery's home base is apparently where she did the Forest Ribbon Trail ritual, and then Lucy's standing on top of the arena, which is it is interesting how much Lucy has really grown a connection to the arena as this like place that really is the symbol of their loss. Like, I'm interested if that's going somewhere or what that represents, because I just find it fascinating that she would continue to tie herself, seemingly by choice, to this place that really signifies where she lost everything. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's messed up. The concept of the arena being so core to, core to her growth moments, I suppose.
Yeah, Laps Castlesus brings up a great point, which is also like obviously the arena word means something else for Lucy, which is
Yes.
her Fey duelist arena.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's an important part of as Lucy, like Lucy's the one whose journey since the end of Arc 13 has been the most about like learning to cope with loss and really build yourself back and figure stuff out. And I think the fact that she's constantly drawing herself back to the arena means something for that.
Yeah. So yeah, the trio takes stock of how they're doing and how the Kennet others are doing, and things aren't in a great place.
I love how Lucy. So Verona has this whole thing with the assignment. She hasn't finished the assignment, and it's due today. And when she finds this out, Verona's like, "Okay, fuck, can you wake me up early? Maybe I can squeeze it through." And Lucy opens her response to this with, "Okay, number one, first thing, I'm not your fucking mum." And my response to reading that coming from Lucy was just, well, how the turntables turn. Because that was like that used to be Verona's chip on her shoulder that Lucy was acting like her fucking guardian. So I think I just really enjoyed seeing Lucy throw that back at her face, because I think Verona just kind of had to accept it in a very fun way.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a good moment. Can we talk about? I mean, this is a comedy beat, but I think it's still worth talking about. Verona calls being forsworn a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even necessarily disagree. I just think it's very interesting that Verona, whose whole vibe is like, oh, the practice is like my whole jam. She only puts it a 7, which is like, I don't know, it kind of almost feels like a growth moment of like, man, Verona accepts that, at least she'd still be alive. At least she'd still have things going. There's worse stuff that could happen.
See, I read it as exactly the opposite.
Oh, no.
Because I still had in my head the whole Brett saying the dishes were a 10 out of 10 emergency.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw this as like her like overcorrecting, trying not to catastrophize for her friends. So she's like underrating everything because she doesn't want to seem like a drama queen, when in my opinion getting forsworn is a fate worthy of some drama. Like,
yeah. No, I really think you know what, I think I said this last time. I think Verona getting forsworn would be so fun for the story.
I know. I think we did talk about this, and I had the same thought. I was reading this and I was like, oh, it'd throw so much off kilter, but like, fuck, seeing Verona get forsworn would just be a juicy story element.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I mean, Verona refuses to tell the others that she's even going to get forsworn, which is,
yeah.
I mean, I feel like I've come down on her communication skills a lot over the past 2 years, but this, like, just continues to be a fucking thorn in her side.
Yeah, it's funny to me that she doesn't bring it up. It's really...
Well, she says she doesn't want them to stress, which is, like, again, it's this classic overcorrecting on what her father does.
Yeah. Oh, Verona, what a
Yeah.
character!
And I mean, like this particularly felt like prescient to me because there were these really big moments of character growth for Verona in her domain ritual at the end of the last arc. Like it really felt like she hit some sort of turning points. And obviously I didn't think that would take the form of Verona is fixed now, quote unquote. But like it is also worth noting that her domain ritual is to an extent incomplete. So it kind of fits that even the growth moments she had during the domain ritual are at the moment a little bit incomplete, basically. Because yeah, she's still waiting on Lost Kennet to come so she can actually finish off her domain ritual. And I imagine that when she finishes it off, there'll be a sort of another moment of her kind of moving forward a little bit in her own journey.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think she's on the path, at least.
Getting there.
She's getting there slowly but surely. Speaking of people being on the path, we get confirmation from, Alpi confirms to the Kenneteers, that the milkmaid set Ralph on his path, which is great. Another great setup for the milkmaid as, like, clearly somebody who is actively contributing to the worst parts of the system, right? So not just a murderer, but also a cog in the machine of, like, the fucked upness of practitioner society.
Expressly somebody who through their fucked upness spreads it. Yeah, like truly a 5 out of 10. Horrifying, this one.
Yeah. Yeah, a real 5 out of 10.
But yeah,
It just, yeah, they're really making some bad deals here, I think.
yeah, well, this is where we really start to get into what it feels like we're really setting this arc up to discuss off the back of the end of arc 16, which is the Kenneteers feel like they're really being challenged to decide where their lines are for stuff. Like, what is the line that they're willing to draw? And I think, this is pale. I don't think it would be as simple as like, you draw one line anywhere, but like the Kenneteers are being caused to question, like, when is something like the milkmaid okay? They specifically talk about like Abraham versus Raquel versus Reed Musser. Like, at what point are they bad people versus someone like Raquel, who presumably hasn't had a chance to get better? Like, at what point can you say no? Go fuck yourself, Abraham. Versus Reed. Even like Reed felt like he was very much on the threshold, and he got there in the end under duress. But yeah, like this is really what Arc 16 challenged us with at the end, and what Arc 17 seems to be diving into full bore is where are your lines? What can you condone in what circumstances? And the Kenneteers are really having to confront that head on as they start to build Lost Kennet, and that's just incredibly juicy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really digging this question taking the forefront more. I think that'll be really fun.
Yeah, like this Arc 17 has quickly set itself up to be a really interesting sequel to Arc 17 in this way. Like 16 felt like it really started to raise these questions, and 17 is now demanding answers to them.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we've ever seen, like, we've talked like in the fandom and on this podcast a lot about like, oh, is what Miss did okay? Is what John did okay? Like, it's stuff fans have been able to talk about for ages. I don't think we've seen the Kenneteers overtly discuss, hey, can we abide Miss? Can we abide Toad Sawyer? Until very recently. So this is such an interesting escalation to something that's been on, I think, their subconsciouses, this is, but now they're having to really think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess we'll continue that conversation.
Quantum Hacker in our chat has described what we're asking as what actions are beyond the pale, which I really like.
Yes, that's very good. So yeah, we're jumping forward, and Lucy is training with Bracken and Guilherme, and Guilherme's deterioration is getting worse and worse, which is apparently very enticing for Melissa.
Oh, Guilherme's just... it's quickly getting to the point where I just can't stand him. Like, he actually... Just when I see Guilherme's coming up on the page, I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, he's gotten under my skin with how unnecessarily strict and arbitrary he's gotten.
Yeah. 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 The injuries getting longer and longer is like a clear mark of winter, right? falling over like his whole vibe.
Yeah.
Which is messed up. And then there's this part at the end where Guilherme is basically using Lucy as a weapon to injure Bracken to teach him a lesson, and it's just so fucked. Like, definitely, Lucy, it's time to bail on these lessons. Which is funny that Melissa is like, this is the time I should try and jump in more.
Yeah. Yeah, it does really feel like Lucy needs to reevaluate her relationship with Guilherme. Because she kind of wasn't getting taught by him anymore, and then she kind of became an active student again because Bracken wanted to sign up, and that was like the requirement.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just doesn't seem to have been a good trade for starters.
I don't know. I mean,
also,
I'm sure they got some good lessons in there, but yeah, I don't know.
I just also can't help but think that part of it is obviously we've talked to death about, Lucy and her the way she works through father figures pretty damn quickly. And Guilherme, despite who he is now, is one of the few she's got left. And I wonder how much she is clinging on to trying to keep Guilherme into her life out of this vibe of like he's one of the only men left, and she can't quite accept that he's gone yet, basically.
Mm-mm. Yeah, she needs to hold on to all of her father figures as much as she can, I suppose.
Yeah. I just think because Guilherme is around, it makes it harder for her to realize that he's already gone. Although that said, he uses like the Winter Court and the Wild Hunt a lot as an excuse for like explaining why he has to do. He's like, oh, if word got hold that you besmirched the Winter Court, like blah 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 blah. Like he's almost never saying he believes in any of the shit that's happening, or any, like all these rules for Winter. He refuses to say that he thinks they're sensible. He always just uses the court as a wider whole to blame them.
Yeah.
And that was something that Lucy like challenged a little bit early on, and I just wonder if we need to go back to challenging that for Guilherme. And he said he'd get violent, but that like he's just constantly using it as an excuse. And I think we got to tell him to either accept, like, own his actions, or get over it.
Yeah. Guilherme. Guilherme gets left behind by the group as they head to school, and they're just kind of chit-chatting as they go. Of course, the highlight of this is Bracken and Melissa continuing to be the OTP.
The fucking shoulder ride. I love how Melissa just instantly is like, Lucy, seriously, shut the fuck up. When Lucy calls
so good. So good.
God, part of me almost thinks Lucy tagging out and letting Melissa be the second Guilherme student isn't the worst idea.
No, it's terrible. It's a terrible idea.
Yeah. Oh, don't get me wrong. I didn't say it's a good idea. I said it's not the worst idea.
Sure, I'm sure I can think of worse ideas.
Yeah, it's a 6 out of 10 bad idea. But no, like Mel volunteering for training with Guilherme does feel like a really natural extension of the stubbornness she had to like become an aware, like she was that pain in our ass for such a huge chunk in the story because she refused to let shit go, and she would rather suffer and hurt herself than like give up on something. And that actually does kind of feel like the sort of student Guilherme's after.
Yeah.
So would it be good for her? No. Would they, get on well? I think kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not enough for me. We get some interesting notes here as well that like Verona's relationships are getting messed up by how much she's relying on the fetch. Like Mel's figured it out, but for the people that aren't aware, it seems pretty clear to me that the fetch is doing some pretty serious social damage here.
Which is not really news or a surprise.
No,
but
we know that that's been happening with Jeremy, but I don't know. It's just kind of like you gotta stop Verona.
Getting it reaffirmed to us in 17.1 in a Lucy chapter feels like it's just the story really going out of its way to remind us, hey, remember the fetch and how it's like, potentially not a good form of escapism. Yeah, I don't know. This whole angle of stuff with Verona continues to just be like a weird thing for me where I see both the good and the bad, and I can't decide whether I'm okay with her pursuing things like the Undercity the way she has or not. Because it's clearly been good for her in some ways, but it's also just playing with fire in others.
Yeah,
Um,
it's worrying stuff.
yeah, I mean the other side here though, that's slightly more positive, is Melissa finally asks like Lucy, "Is Verona avoiding me?" And like Lucy, without kind of giving too much away, is basically able to say, well, she gives her the lowdown on the whole drug dream, basically, without so many words, and sort of says, "Yeah, she's avoiding you because she doesn't want that to become true." And I'm just
Mm,
super interested to see if Melissa is going to confront Verona with this and what that would look like, because I feel like Verona has to let go of trying to avoid that prophecy in order to actually avert it. And it'd just be so kind of weirdly hilarious if Melissa is a big part of how she breaks past that.
mm, mm.
Because like the fact is, Melissa
Yeah,
is doing a lot better. She's made connections. Like she's essentially Lucy's friend now. She's got Bracken. Like in a way, Melissa's come out of it already through her connections to people, and that's the thing Verona's tossing away to try and avoid it. And I wonder if, yeah, just of all people, Melissa's going to be the one to get that through to Verona.
yeah, yeah. True. God, Melissa's such a great character.
She really is.
um, so yeah, Lucy and grandfather attempt to bargain with Killwagon to make him not so violent, and he really doesn't seem to give a shit.
He gives zero shits.
Yeah.
Um, I find him really frustrating on one level because essentially his argument boils down to just being bullshit rules lawyering. Like he's
Mm,
constantly like, "Oh, there's no hard written traffic laws, so I can do whatever the fuck I want." And
yeah.
grandfather's like, "Can you just not be a dick though?" And he's like, "There's no rules. I can do whatever I want." And it's like, no, because that's the sort of thinking that gets us with super bureaucratic spelled out rules that you just will start trying to rules lawyer out of anyway. Like it just,
Yeah.
yeah. But then also, he's fucking
He's
hilarious.
so fun. His whole vibe is so much fun. Oh my god.
I
Um,
loved how, like, because he's just very upfront and like shit stirry.
yeah. And he's clearly just having such a good time, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like the bit where he's clearly just saying shit to make that one of that, I can't remember the dog, Miles, that's it. To make Miles
Oh yeah,
laugh, where he
laugh.
pulls
Yeah,
out the ones who walk away from Omelus reference just to kind of fucking troll Lucy. It's great.
yeah. I called that out that line out earlier. It's like that's my favorite line in the chapter because like
It's so good.
not only is that a really astute reference for what the story is dealing with right now, like we've been talking
Yes.
about all this stuff so heavily, he also like turns it into a joke about his
About
wheelchair.
his wheelchair, yes,
Like
it's so good.
there's so many levels it's operating on. It's just an insanely clever line, so prescient, and again, just the fact that we're getting an Omelas reference from a boogeyman is just hilarious to me. Like having this
So
boogeyman who
good.
carries his trailer of weapons around tell you to read more is just
Yeah.
funny.
Oh my god. What a great character.
Um, I also love the bit where the person whose stall he wrecked is like, if you give me a weapon, like that's okay, I'll like forgive you or whatever. Like
Mm.
I consider that reparations. And he's like, will you say it was a shit location? And they're like, will it get me a better weapon? He's like, sure. And then the stall person's like, it was a shit location. And Killwagon just like turns around to Lucy and he's like, it was a shit location. It's just like, you cheeky cunt. Like, what a piece of shit. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I
It's
can see why he's friends with
fun.
goblins.
Yeah. And he's a great fit for the market because he clearly collects horrifying weapons and tools. So he's just
Yeah.
like very natural.
I mean,
Natural fit.
compared to the milkmaid, he's a pretty like as far as moral boogeymen go, he seems about as close as you're going to get, right?
Yeah, he talks about how he used to kill when he was trying to figure stuff out, but he stopped doing that since. And it's
Yeah,
kind of
as
like,
soon as he
oh,
realized he didn't
yeah,
have
cool.
to, he stopped.
Yeah, totally.
Um
Like, oh, you're actually great as a character.
yeah,
Yeah.
like a really interesting wrinkle in this whole debate about moral lines and stuff because it would have been kind of easy to look at like the milkmaid and some dude called Killwagon and be like, okay, let's like not let boogeymen in.
Yeah,
But like he
I
makes
know.
a pretty compelling case for boogeymen who should be allowed to be let in.
Yeah,
Um,
he feels like he's a better fit for Kennet than the Milkmaid or the Turtle
yeah,
Queen.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, it also ties into something Lucy brought up in the dream that we didn't touch on, which is a wrinkle to all of this. Where do you draw the line? Stuff is how far back
Mm,
does something have to be before you can
yes,
forgive it?
yes.
Like, do we hold Guilherme responsible for evil shit he did 500 years ago? Do we
Mm,
hold Killwagon responsible for killing people 60 years ago when he was confused, had just escaped what sounds like a pretty shit place, and thought he had to kill to stop from going back to hell? Um,
mm.
yeah, like the God, what's that legal term for how long before stuff stops being stuff you can get put in jail for?
The statute of
Statute of
limitations.
limitations, that's it, yeah. What's the statute of limitations on all of these crimes is really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
How much do you have to have demonstrated you've changed to get away with shit?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't want to get into this convo too much because I feel like we're going to talk about it a lot more in this chapter. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, Lucy chats to Bubble Yum, who gives her some advice on how to handle these types.
Yeah, and here's yet another character who has something to say on the theme of the arc, where she says, "We're all jerks. The trick is you get enough jerks together in agreement, and you get to make the rules to manage the other jerks. Sometimes you pick on jerks, sometimes you try to make things better. Usually, that one doesn't work." Which is just like
Hmm.
this really dim, pessimistic view of the current conundrum of the story, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I find this really interesting coming off the back of the previous Lucy chapter, which is her choosing to be kind to Wallace, right? This advice from Bubble Yum, and similarly the advice she got from Rook in that chapter, is the exact opposite of like, let's be more brutal, you know? Uh,
Yeah.
and it's such a fun setup for the moral dilemma of this chapter.
Yeah, because Bubblegum is really just making the case that there are some people who won't respond to anything but
But
the
violence,
firm
yeah.
arm of the law. And to an extent, she's right. But then the trick there can often be like, well, what are the rules and laws that we're enforcing? Um, like the thing with Killwagon that he brought up is that he can eat food to survive, but he also needs to either kill people or scare the shit out of them. And it's a
Mm,
bit like, okay, well, like like he's going to naturally buck against rules that prevent him from scaring people because he kind of needs that to survive. So you either basically hammer down on him, which kind of seems unfair, or you try to figure out a set of rules where he can do that, I guess, like let him run a haunted house or some shit. I don't know.
mm, yeah. I'm sure they'll be able to find a way. It's what they were talking about with Chloe and Nibble of like, how can we ethically source human meat? I'm sure there's a way to do it.
Yeah, I'm easily impressed brings up there's the whole Rook transformation angle. Although my understanding is that the shit she takes from people has to go somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, yeah, as you said, we'll get to talk about this a lot over this arc, I'm sure. Um,
Yeah.
the other important thing that Bubble Yum does here that is worth calling out is she basically threatens the Kenneteers if they hurt Toady. She does the whole
Mm-hmm.
he really cares about you and I really care about him. So,
Yeah. So don't fuck it up.
like yeah, classic sort of veiled threat vibe. Um
Mm.
but she does also, say, "Hey, listen, he loves to teach and so does DD and I can teach some goblin dueling." Um and I genuinely do think it would be fun to see Lucy take her up on that and get some complimentary stuff to her Fey dueling, while also, very importantly, getting to see Guilherme's reaction to learning that Lucy's also doing goblin dueling on the side,
Mm.
because he won't take that well.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Let's see if
Yeah.
that pans out. Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting.
It's worth pointing out, Fran has said in our chat that Melissa should take Bubble Yum up on being a goblin duelist, which I actually really like.
That is an interesting one. I like that too.
Power couple, Bracken the Fey duelist, Melissa the goblin duelist.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. That'll be a fun relationship. um, so yeah, Lucy decides to choose a new council member who can represent Kennet. The only person who she feels is up to the task, Louise.
Louise, somebody who's famously up for things.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I do genuinely though love this idea so much. Like, especially as we create found Kennet and really sort of up the representation of the magical aspects of Kennet in its build up. It really does make sense to let the Council of Kennet above lean a bit more towards like humanity and the aware. And Louise is such a great choice for them. Um, she's such a marked difference from everyone we've seen in the story, and giving an aware a position of power is just a huge change from the way we've seen them treated by everyone else in the story. Like it's yeah, I love this idea.
Yeah. It's great, isn't it? Like, I love the bit where they're talking about how Louise met Ken and really liked him. And Lucy's like, "You love Kennet." And it's just like, this is
Yeah.
so awesome. It's such a powerful start to the chapter, I suppose. Such a powerful, especially considering what we know we're going to be dealing with in this chapter. It's such a powerful marker of what the Kenneteers want, which is they want to
Yeah.
do legit good shit. They want to find unconventional ways to solve these problems that seem like they're really going to work quite well.
Yeah, and moving Kennet above's focus to humanity hasn't taken the form of practitioners or innocents who already have too much power. It's taken the form of the aware and people who don't have baggage in history. It's yeah, it's such a
Mm,
great idea. Like this, I'm starting to because I've been internally second guessing the choice of grandfather as a replacement for Charles a lot in my head, but I might start to cut Lucy some more slack if she's making decisions like this because actually it's a great one.
mm, yeah. Yeah, it is.
Um,
It's a great decision.
I mean, it is worth calling out from Louisa's perspective. She does remind us how fucking dog shit she is as taking care of herself. Um, so there is an interesting angle to this of, is this going to be good for Louise? Will this help her get help? Will she treat like Louise has a bad track record of taking care of herself. Is this going to make that worse, better, keep it the same? I think unless it's making it better, like I don't know how good an idea this actually is.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I guess we'll see how it turns out in practice, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
I,
I
I
have
yeah,
faith.
I'm optimistic that it will be good for Louise as well. She'll actually find something in here that will like give her something to take care of herself for.
Mm,
People in the chat are already comparing it to Melissa and Sir. Uh, I really like
mm,
that comparison.
mm. Yeah. Um, and that's the lead in to arc 17, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, I think it's going
Between
to be a really fun arc.
between the ethical conundrums we're already getting hit with and the title "Gone and Done It," like this.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, what's the it that they're going to have gone and done? The
I,
start with the meteor really makes it seem like it's going to be
yeah,
something bad.
I can't wait.
Um, but yeah, I guess that wraps up these chapters. Let's get into some pale predictions that we've pulled out from the community. Elliot, do you want to start with your prediction?
Yeah, I'll go first. I've pulled a prediction from I'm Easily Impressed, who's basically predicted that Lucy's going to start integrating music into her practice more.
Mm,
And they basically have like a big list of reasons why they feel this makes sense. Like obviously she's got the earring as her implement. She's been playing John's guitar more recently. Music has always been a big thing for her, and she even made a comment in 16.10, I think it was, in the domain ritual about how this place would be even cooler with music.
mm,
So basically, I'm Easily Impressed is just pulling all those threads together and saying that as she matures as a practitioner, she's going to use music more. So maybe integrate cool background music into her Fey Duelist arenas, incorporate some sort of music component to some of the curses she puts on people. Like in general, she just really associates music as being something that helps her connect with herself.
yeah.
That makes sense. And I just, yeah, I have pretty much already decided this is 100% true in my head.
Yeah.
You've been
Yeah.
asking for music-based practice for years now, Ruben. So,
I have.
um, I feel like you were just ahead of the curve on this one. You saw it coming.
Maybe. Maybe. We'll see. I think it's cool. I definitely think it would be very cool. We shall see. Maybe her and Nora can start a band. Now, I realized about 2 minutes ago that I'd forgotten to pull out a prediction, which means let's move on to the discussion question answers for this week. So yeah, we've been running a discussion question for the past 2 weeks, which was, what's the deal with Pisces and Hazel? Which has obviously been, everyone's been thinking about it for the past few weeks on the Reddit and with Wildbow's cryptic hints and Reddit posts, Snowdrop's tiny fans, and yours. Let's get into some of these answers. I think a lot of these, we should probably preface by saying a lot of these theories are very in-depth and there's a lot to like put together. So we won't, I don't think we can get into all the evidence that everyone has in all of their theories because we'd be here for like 2 hours.
No, I think it's like a doof staple to say we had to condense discussion question answers down, go read the whole thing. Like, we sort of often say that, but now more than ever, we're literally like, we were getting 2,000 word discussion question answers. We just literally can't go through them all.
Yeah, but we'll kind of give a bit of summaries and our thoughts on some of them. I think there's a fair amount of overlap between them as well, like, which is fine because, you know, we're all reading from the same story, so there's inevitably going to be some overlap. But yeah, we'll kind of call them out and talk about parts that we liked and all that stuff. Should we start with the White Duke?
Yeah.
Great I do want to... word, great document.
It reminded me of some of those, like, so the White Duke sent us 2 versions of their theory, the summarized Word doc and then a comment elaborating. And the Word doc is very much like those early 2000s really unhinged homemade HTML websites you see.
I loved it.
Like it felt almost as much like a call for help as it did a discussion question answer.
Yeah, I was expecting that there would be some music auto-playing as I scrolled through the doc, but I don't think Google Docs have that technology yet.
But then they went on to elaborate that this shitpost doc was actually their, like, a summary of their real theory, which was that, you know, Pisces was from like an alternate reality or another world of some kind. And like, this is definitely where my head was after reading the chapter for the first time, because the pillar ritual had this sort of first contacty, getting each other in sync vibe.
It really does. It reminded me a lot of Arrival, right? It gives a lot of that same vibe, which I think the White Duke kind of pulled into Aliens or something extraterrestrial, extra dimensional, or whatever, right?
Yeah, like I don't think I was alone in being one of those people who read it and thought, oh, was he an alien or something? And what the White Duke did is actually went and followed through on that and kind of compiled all the evidence into a pretty compelling case. And I really like this theory.
Yeah, I quite liked it too. I don't know if it's correct, just from a meta perspective of it would feel pretty wild to introduce aliens into this story, but I did like it.
Yeah, I agree. Although in saying that, the edge of the paths is where I would expect aliens to be. Like the edge of our paths intersecting with theirs. Like if anywhere was going to have first contact, it was going to be the ends of the paths. But yeah, I mean, this series, I guess to touch into some of the meta stuff, like obviously Wildbow gave 9 questions to sort of answer, and the area of it that this feels a bit divorced from for me is how it fits into Hazel's journey.
Yeah.
I think this does feel like a great fit for some of the facts we get about Pisces and the way the ritual works, but I don't see that link to Hazel, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know. I still really like this theory though.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Alternative Arrival was bringing up reflections as a recurring motif, which I think a lot of people latched onto. So Pact Versa talks about Pisces' world being kind of the inside-out version of ours, and Pisces is the mirror of Hazel. Dabaran talks about Pisces as an alternate version of Hazel. And then Snowdrop's Tiny Fan, I think, is the theory that really takes this idea and runs with it the furthest.
Who would have guessed that the longest, best, and most like well-sourced theory would come from Snowdrop's Tiny Fan?
No, who could have imagined? Yeah, but you know, this one is, there's a long Reddit post about it, so you can read it. But yeah, it's latching onto Wildbow's clue of the difference between my and Snowdrop's Tiny Fan interprets that as there's not a path or the paths, but my paths. They're very much tied to the person who is exploring them, and Pisces is a personalized reflection of the of the practitioner of the finder, and kind of a guide that is built from the finder, and then as a deeper level goes into the interpretations of the ending and Pisces' disappearance and all kinds of stuff. I loved it. So good, right? So good.
Yeah, it's definitely like one of the most compelling theories to talk about how it touches on like all 9 of those questions. I think it's got pretty solid answers for most of them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really good one. We also got like one that I think was like a sort of our discussion thread exclusive, as far as I could tell, from Propaganda Pagoda.
Yep.
And I really liked reading this theory, but I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure what the theory actually is. Like, I can't give you the 1-sentence summary because there's a lot of really interesting
concepts.
and a lot of really interesting facts about how like like how Pisces as a being relates to what he represents astrologically.
Yes.
And they bring up the idea of Hazel's figure 8 being a Mobius strip, and that ties into some other stuff in a really cool way. So they're like, lots of really cool ideas, but it kind of went over my head. This theory is like what they're actually saying Pisces is, I suppose.
I couldn't pull out the grand unifying statement of it for sure, but there's a lot of very interesting things in there, like interesting imagery and real world analogs from astrology, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then your theory, Elliot.
Yeah, why don't I'm obviously biased. Why don't you tell us about my theory, Rube? Being the good friend that you are, I assume you've read it cover to cover.
I did read it, of course. Of course I read it. So I guess I would sum up your theory as saying, like, here's the summary of the theory. Pisces is, as one of these architects, a kind of deeper manifestation of the paths itself as an entity, right? And the paths are, I think you latched on quite heavily to the idea of the paths being like the childlike, and being a manifestation of kind of childlike ideas, and then the journey of being on the paths is the journey of, I guess, growing up. Something I really liked about your theory, Elliot, is tying the paths as a thing that is kind of trying to come of age to the fact that this is in some ways a coming of age story for the Kenneteers, which on a like meta thematic level was really great, I think.
I'm not gonna lie, a big part of how I went about putting the theory together was I figured like the sections of the chapter dealing with Pisces and the ritual had been analyzed to death. So I was coming in so late to the game, I was like, I'm gonna look at Hazel's part of the journey, and I read like the other part of the chapter, and then I reread the book that Avery read like 2 chapters earlier, because I figured that was presumably that was when Hazel was first introduced, and I was like, well, this is presumably Warbo's seeding shit. So the basis of how I went about it was very much to read the shit around what had already been analyzed to death.
Yeah, but I think I do quite like a lot of parts to it. I think you started to draw ideas about what does this mean for lost Kennet? Does this mean we can find a way to have the paths grow without necessarily growing up and changing?
I think, like, obviously I'm a bit biased, but I think there are parts of my theory I obviously really like, but I do think, like, to compare it to, say, something like Snowdrop's Tiny Fan, I think hers does a better a better job of answering a lot of the questions around Pisces. Like, if I was to sort of redo my theory, I reckon I'm still quite confident on all my read on the paths and sort of that macro stuff, but I reckon if you told me that the part of my theory that's wrong is exactly what Pisces meant to Hazel and what happened to him, it wouldn't surprise me much. I think like theories like Snowdrop's Tiny Fan cover that end of it a lot better.
I think STF's theory has a very nice kind of unifying through line, which is difficult to pull off to such a strong degree. But that's all our discussion question responses. Next week we're going to do a slightly simpler and less complex discussion question. What animal mask would you choose for an honorary Kenneteer? So
Yep.
we've got a number of candidates for for the fourth Kenneteer, you know.
Yeah, Snowdrop's one of them, but I don't think
Snowdrop would be cheating,
that's
of course.
yeah. But obviously, like
Unless you
we've
can
got
justify why Snowdrop's mask wouldn't be an opossum mask. That'll be an interesting one.
Ibis is the only other one that I think works for her.
Mm.
But yeah, like we've got a bunch of honorary Kenneteers at this point. I think Liberty's one. People like Fernanda and Raquel are certainly applicants. You've got Melissa. Yeah, this obviously came up because Melissa, this chapter, decided that her mask was a dragon. And I think that is a terrible fucking idea for her, but I'm curious to see what people think. Yeah, Bracken, I think, is almost an honorary Kenneteer. Jeremy, yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, what animal mask would you choose for some of our honorary Kenneteers?
Yeah.
We'll save the discussion question around morality for later in this arc, because I'm sure we'll get to talk it to death.
Yeah, definitely. If you have answers to this discussion question, you can put them in our discussion thread, which will be linked in the show notes down below.
Yep. Don't forget to check out our Twitter too. We're still posting daily memes there of varying quality.
But varying quality means some of them are really good, so it's a plus. If you want, you can head to duffmedia.com to get all the info on all the shows on the Duff Media Network, including...
We can't talk about it yet, I don't think.
Never mind, then.
Well, I think we could say there's something coming soon. Keep your eye on the duffmedia.com website.
Yes.
Yeah, there's something new coming there. Honestly, I think later today.
Yes, I think it is today.
So by the time you're listening to this, if you're not listening live, it might already be there, and we could have talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
If you want to support... if you want to support the Duff Media Network, you can become a patron at patreon.com/duffmedia. Becoming a patron gives you access to all kinds of perks depending on your support level, but also, of course, just means that you're supporting this show. And that's great. So thank you if you're a patron.
Yep, and don't forget to stop by Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbow, or he'll get the Turtle Queen to slap you.
Mm-hmm.